Welcome to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and today I'm talking with Alex Smith about being head of year. Alex started teaching about 14 years ago. He's taught in a couple of schools in Perth and now teaches in Bunbury. Welcome to Forest.chat, Alex.
Thank you, Paul. Really grateful to be here, grateful for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So thank you very much for having me on.
Pleasure. I'm looking forward to it as well, and I'm sure my listeners are as well. Head of year, what is that?
So, Paul, head of year is a position within middle management of teaching. So you're not quite as high up as the principal or your vice principals or your deputy principals. You're in middle management. So as you would know, in high school, there's year 7 through to year 12. And usually there's one person, that's the head of year, who's in charge of looking after a year group. So I'm in charge of looking after a year group of approximately 180 students. So they're sort of entering the second half of their schooling at the moment. Never a dull moment as a head of year. And you're at the heart of what you're doing is you're trying to get them from point A to point B. So learning how to move from being a child, ultimately, hopefully, finishing their high school experience with a clear vision of what their future looks like and resembling a bit more of an adult. I know sometimes that's not always the case, but that's what we try and do. So how does that actually look like? Well, ultimately, we're looking at raising or helping parents raise good kids, in a nutshell.
So there's a lot of different elements that come into raising good kids. Typically, I'd often think about school as being an academically based institution. Is there any more to the role than just the academic side of things?
Absolutely. Academics is important, and as far as I'm concerned, academics help open doors. It provides students with opportunities. Having said that, though, as a head of year, that's only one pillar of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help raise with the parents. So I like to call it a partnership. It's ultimately a partnership with you, the head of year, the parents, and also the students. So we're trying to help them become the best version of themselves. So we're looking at also helping them with their beliefs and values, their attitudes, and also critical thinking. How do we engage with content in the real world? How do we engage with one another in the real world? What does respectful relationships look like, both between different genders, and what does it look like to also enter a workplace and be a good contributor? So these are all facets of learning that kind of go beyond your typical academics where you think science or your maths and it's about almost learning some of these problems. It's what I like to call the hidden curriculum.
And why would that curriculum be hidden? You would think that parents send their children to school for the academic side of things. How do these other things actually come into being?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. I think because they don't typically get reported on. We often associate school with grades. And if we really sort of distill it down, make it really simple, often I know my experience of schooling and how my parents approached schooling was, how are your grades going? There wasn't too many conversations about, are you doing okay? How are you traveling? Do you know what it looks like to be a good person? Do you know what it looks like to be a good man? And I think it's important that we make them visible. So they're not necessarily explicitly taught day in, day out in a classroom setting. However, I'm very proud to say that at the school that I work at, we do try and make it as visible as possible. We try and instill very clear values that our students both learn and abide by. That's how we like to help them with their learning. And also things like looking at their own character. So looking within, practicing self-reflection, and what strengths and weaknesses they may have, and also how can they overcome those strengths or weaknesses.
That's pretty deep for kids going through school. Like, as you said, they've been kids. They're not adults yet. That's some pretty heavy-hitting stuff.
Absolutely. And the way that I like to think about it is trigonometry can be really tricky for students, and learning about Newton's laws of physics can be also very challenging. So we like to throw academic challenges at kids. Why not throwing challenges at them as far as their personal growth too?
Do you have a mandate for doing that in some way?
So I work in a Catholic school. So within the context of a Catholic school, we definitely look at developing not only the person but the heart, and we believe in the spirit as well. So that comes through experiences where they may experience forms of wonder and awe, and ideally they might also interact with a divine entity depending on their beliefs. And ultimately, we're hoping that if they choose to believe in God, then that's a good thing. So we like to be quite inclusive in how we approach it, but we that's how we typically do it.
And having that Catholic school set up, the parents anticipate that would be a part of what their kids are learning. So that's where your mandate comes from, right?
Yeah. And we do have mandates as well through our governing system, where we do teach pastoral care is what we call it. In a public school system, there isn't an explicit pastoral care. They do provide exceptional pastoral care in public schools, but we also have it as a very clear mandate as how we're actually governed as well, that we are developing the other element of the students who come to our community. Public schools provide pastoral care. I suppose we explicitly have it mandated. I can't speak for public schooling and whether they have it mandated. I've not worked in a public school. For me, without jumping too far forward, my teaching journey was largely spiritually and faith-based as well. So,
Alex, what does it take you to be head of year?
Well, if I look back at my journey, as I alluded to, I had the great privilege of going to a Catholic school in Perth myself, and my experience there was an exceptional one. I learned so much from the teachers that I had the great privilege of being a student under. And when I left the school, I was a little lost. I'm sure that many students could relate to feeling a little lost. They didn't necessarily have direction. I had options. I had lots of options. I did okay at school and ended up with a fairly reasonable opportunities at university, but I lacked that direction. And it was only when I started reflecting on the teachers and the influence that they had many years down the track, actually, talking about 10, maybe 12 years down the track, was that I realised just how impactful it was to teach. So in 2010, I decided to become a teacher, some of it by self-reflection, also some of it by necessity. There was a job redundancy that took place at the same time, which was a blessing, really, in hindsight, but it forced my hand a little bit. So I did my grad dip and I went headfirst into teaching. I went back to the school that I was actually a student at, and I taught there for 7 years of my teaching career. And I was very, very privileged to have that opportunity to be able to give back a little bit. So to me, becoming a teacher, firstly, was more of a vocation. I felt compelled to do it. I felt compelled to give back. There was a driving need to serve others. And that still drives me today. It's just how I serve has shifted slightly. I spend a little less time in the classroom, and I spend a little bit more time with parents, dealing with conversations that might be higher end, helping parents and students when there's problems that arise, things that are beyond our control more often than not, life issues, mental health issues, breakdowns of families. We also get some other high-end, higher-risk kind of situations that I'm presented with, and that requires a degree of emotional regulation as well. So I've had to continually upskill. So I've been a head of year for 4 years now, and I think one of the things that I can reflect upon is how to be a head of year is you have to be the best version of yourself and get really good at dialing in how can you be the best version of yourself as often as possible. Not perfect, but just the best version of yourself.
That's always something good to strive for, I think, to be the best version of yourself. Self-reflection and what you can actually gain from that.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I feel like it's almost like a muscle, right? The more that you use it, the stronger it gets. And then in my experience as a head of year, we ask our students to reflect on their character and their character development. And I think it would be wildly hypocritical of me if I don't do that myself. So I very much walk the walk and I talk the talk. So I constantly do the character strength surveys the same time that the students, if I ask them to do it, I do it too. And I reflect on it as well. One of the interesting things that came up for me was self-regulation seemed to be towards the bottom of a bit of a weakness for me. And I'm instantly able to reflect on that. It's something so simple. It's chocolate and me, for example, forget about it. So,
you mean it's so good you can't forget about it?
That's right. So I had to practice that myself. And it's that in itself takes time, and there's relapses, and you get back on the bandwagon and you just keep trying. But I think it's the process is so important as well as the striving. And it ultimately keeps coming back to what I mentioned earlier, Paul, that it's about, by serving others, I think you serve yourself too. You find that you're far more fulfilled when you feel like you're actually having an impact in the lives of others.
Absolutely. And I've talked on the podcast about, how I want this podcast to do good. Yeah. And that's in a similar vein, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I know that you're definitely having an impact. So it's great stuff.
Thank you. Is there anything else you can think of about that's the element of what it takes you to do what you do?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to explain that it's a big step up from teaching in a classroom. As a high school teacher, you might teach somewhere around the region of 24 lessons and maybe 4 or 5 different classes, depending on your subject area, possibly even more. But you might know 150 students reasonably well within that role, that context of a teacher. As a head of year, the expectation would be that you know 180 students, not reasonably well, but fairly well, to the point where ideally you're able to catch problems before they arise in an ideal world. Not always the case, but it's important that you develop relationships. I think that's what it boils down to. You really need to be a relational sort of person. You need to enjoy working through problems. Conflict resolution is a big part of the role. Being comfortable in tricky situations too. I think that's important. As I'm sure we all know, when it comes to your children, when things go wrong, it's high stakes conversations. And having the ability to understand that it's high stakes, acknowledge that it's high stakes, but not allow it to overcome you and consume you is quite important. So I like to describe it as almost keeping an even keel. So to use a boating analogy, sometimes you're in a storm and it's a big one, but you've got to keep that even keel. You've got to stay level-headed and ultimately just come back to what's in the best interests of everyone here. And if you do that, and you do that often enough, I've found that more often than not, you'll do well by others, and it'll work out.
So there's a little bit of, okay, you need to concentrate and focus, I guess, on being that calm person in the room,
Yep.
which means not triggering all your emotions and
Yep.
and that sort of things. And I could imagine that there would be situations that might actually be triggers from your life experience. You know, seeing this is like maybe a trigger for something in your life, but you've actually got to overcome that trigger and be the calm one.
Absolutely.
Because there's probably no one else being calm.
More often than not, no. Yeah, and I think practicing my spirituality, practicing my faith, practicing my routine so I can be the best version of myself, it really helps me maintain that calm in those tricky situations. And absolutely, you said triggers. Oh yeah, there have been multiple situations where I come home after a day and I wonder why I've been so riled up. I might not have looked so riled up, but internally, I definitely felt it. It's usually for me straight out to do some gardening, some woodworking, or maybe going and lifting some weights or going for a run, or even just practicing some breathing, just so I can just work through that.
So you got to know what works for you
Yeah.
in a particular situation so that you can actually release it and let it go.
Yeah. And for me, it's important that I don't come home and that actually comes out of me and affects my family. That's super important. I liken driving into my garage as almost like this moment going into another dimension. I'm going into my family home, and I can't bring that home with me. And I've got to do what I need to do, so I'm not bringing that home. Easy to say, not always easy to do. But I think it'd be unfair for me to allow the frustrations that I might be feeling, or I might have had a great day as well. That often helps. But it's unfair, especially on the bad days, to let it impact on how I present as a husband and a father. So yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's very important to be that good role model in the family.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of my responsibility too. As a head of year, you want to be a good role model for your students and just for the broader community. And I think it's about helping the community as well, lifting the community up.
So we've had a look at what it takes to be head of year. We'll have a break now,
Okay.
and after the break, we'll have a look at what it means. We've had a look at what it takes. Now, let's have a look at what it means. Alex, what does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you can be head of year?
I love this question, Paul. So I'll try and break them up as best as possible. So to be a head of year for me is part of me fulfilling a purpose. I believe we're all here for a purpose. And if I'm serving others and I'm helping the community and I am in the process of helping others continually growing, then it means an awful lot to me. I still see myself as a student. I'm turning 42 this year, and I still see myself as a student. So as a head of year, what a wonderful way to continue to learn and grow. I'm in a position where my school's really great at helping other teachers and the middle managers continue to grow. So we get lots of professional learning opportunities. I'm doing further study myself because I want to continue to grow. So I'm very much embracing a love of learning. and the position allows me to certainly do that, as well as my school. Furthermore, what it means to me is that I'm hopefully making a difference in the lives of other people, and not that I'm looking for that validation. And that's one of the interesting things about teaching. You seldom, if ever, know you've made the impact. But every now and then you get these little moments, and they're gold. They're absolute gold. I've had a number of interactions with students who have graduated, and I had in my classes, sort of 10 years down the track. Last year, I actually had a wonderful experience where I bumped into a previous student of mine, and he went out of his way to thank me for how I taught him and how I really resonated with him. And he gave me some great feedback on the sort of teacher that I was. And that was amazing. And it's lovely to know that you have had a positive impact on the lives of people. So it certainly is important to me as far as what it means to me as a head of year. It's challenging. I like to stay quite challenged. There's never a dull moment as a head of year. So it's the sort of job where you don't always know what's coming. If you like being organized and you like knowing what you're doing every minute, it's not the job for you. So knowing what I'm walking into each day varies wildly. And also the people. I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that I work with a really great group of people in my pastoral care team, as well as the principal, the senior managers, and the staff. We've got amazing people who are all very like-minded, which really just helps every day. It makes the hard parts of life, or the difficult parts of life, that much easier, knowing you've got that group of people who've got your back. So that's what it means to me. So for my family, Paul, I think being a head of year has certainly helped me as a parent. I've got 3 young boys at home, and it's good being a head of year and just observing parenting styles and ways of parenting, and just picking things up along the way. So for my family, I think they would certainly appreciate that. In my role, while it's busy, it certainly allows me to be a better father, I think. And it also gives me a little bit of time too. One of the great privileges of being in the education industry is that you do have the school holidays. There's often that assumption that we're just kicking back and relaxing. Not always the case, but we do have a little bit more time and freedom where I can spend real quality time with my kids. And that's certainly why I stay in the industry. And so I can be present and really be an active and hopefully loving father.
It's so good to be able to share that. Well, it's not really extra time, but more time than certainly someone who's got a regular, 9 to 5 job, and they get the weekends and they get 4 weeks of leave, and every 10 years or 15 years or whatever they get a couple of months off. But
that's right. Yeah,
it's a far more regular opportunity to spend that time.
Absolutely, and I try and make that as intentional as possible. Try and be present. Easy to say, not always easy to do. So try and be as present as I possibly can be. The kids are only young ones, and all of the research and data suggests that those formative years, connection with the parents are integral to what life may look like for kids as teenagers. So if you've got a really close bond with your kids before to the age of 8, I believe it is, when those tricky sort of issues arise that invariably do for teenagers, you throw in technology in there as well, and social media, and the world in which they're faced with and they have to grow up in is vastly different to what we had. And if you've got that trust, that bond with your children, they'll come to you. They'll talk to you about the problems. And it's often when they don't talk to you, that's when problems, really, really big problems, can arise. So I think it helps me be a better father, and it helps me be more connected with my children, and obviously spending more time with my wife as well, who's also an educator. So we get to have the holidays together too. So that's awesome.
She's been rather busy. I think she'd want to get back to work soon, would she?
Yeah. She's been busy with our boys, and she's doing a tremendous job. She is picking up a little bit of work, so that's going to be interesting to manage as well. Just time management, how we're going to navigate through that. But I'm confident that we can do that. So it'll be good. And Paul, just supposed to go to the last point. What does it mean to the community? I would like to think that the community is appreciative of the role of heads of year and middle managers in education. Sometimes it'd be good to get a little bit more feedback, I'm a very feedback-driven kind of guy, both good and bad. And, we have a negativity bias, I think, in our society. So more than happy to provide negative feedback. But when things are going well, we often don't hear about it. So, I'm grateful that within my school context, the parents are pretty active, and I get some lovely comments and emails and across the year when things are going well. From a broader community perspective, I think that there is very much a need to continue to help our young people grow and learn, and I think the community acknowledges that. And we need to provide our young people with the right tools, the right spaces, and the right opportunities to do that. So if I can keep passing on that message, and we all respond as a community, I think then it'll be a wonderful result.
It sounds to me like the role that you have, effectively moving quite a large number of soon-to-be adults through a system where you're trying to get them to be the best people they can be and the best adults that they can be.
Yeah.
Well, they become society.
That's the goal, Paul, and that's the ideal, right? I think if we can help people, as I mentioned earlier, be the best version of themselves, then I think we can only improve as a society.
It's a bit like if you put good things into the soil, you can get good things out. But if you put bad things into the soil, you're not going to get much good out of it. So what you're doing is trying to put good things into the soil in that.
Absolutely. It's all about planting seeds. We don't know when they'll germinate, but hopefully they do.
And they'll have what they need to actually grow and thrive.
That's right. Yeah, that's very much an analogy that I use quite regularly about the planting seeds. And it's just about, again, those opportunities. So if we can provide kids with opportunities, even when they make, or especially when they make poor choices, to not judge, to not shame, to go, okay, well, that wasn't the best decision, was it?
When you see the results, you might agree.
Yelling at that teacher or doing this or doing that, probably not the greatest idea. How could you have done that better? And when they realize that you're not going to judge them, that you're there to help them learn from that choice, the poor choice, they usually respond more often than not fairly well. I've found it's we're a highly judgmental and I suppose in many ways justice-driven society. We get caught up in needing things to be right and fair without having all the answers sometimes or having all of the context. I think it's very easy sometimes to look at a student who continues to make some poor choices and judge them as disengaged or just not being a particularly good young person, or they don't have good values. But do we really know what's going on? I like to use an iceberg sort of analogy. More often than not, the behavior that we're presented with is about 10% of what's going on, because you only see 10% of the iceberg. What's the 90%? And I suppose going back to what I do as a head of year and how I do it, that's part of my job too, to look underneath, to actually have a good look at that iceberg and go, okay, there's a few things going on here. So that's why we're getting the behavior that we're getting, or the actions that we're getting. So that's certainly a big part of it.
A very interesting place to be, and for some kids that'll be a pivotal interaction in their life.
Yeah, I hope so. And like I said, you usually never know. You'll get a handshake, and but that's all you need to know, and certainly not in the business of measuring someone's development and measuring whether they're becoming a better person or not. We never know when they'll germinate as that seed, but hopefully we provide them with the experiences, the tools, and the grace sometimes as well. It's really what's needed, so they can germinate when they're ready. I suppose the only other thing I might say is as far as what it means to be a head of year is that, for me, you're a leader, essentially. Whether you want to be or not, as a head of year, you're a leader, and you have to embrace that part of the job. And to be a good leader, you have to shine the light on yourself. You've got to look in the mirror, and you have to do that work as well. I think it's Simon Sinek says, know your why. Start with the why. And why am I a head of year? To make a difference. If I go a little bit deeper, I'm also a head of year because it helps me be the best possible person that I can be. It forces me to continue to learn and grow and develop and not stagnate, which is certainly, before I became a teacher, I feel I was on that sort of pathway of stagnation.
So that redundancy that you faced earlier in life, was that blessing in disguise?
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely was. And I recall this really pivotal moment, sitting at the dinner table with my mum and my stepdad, and they just said to me, "What do you really want to do? You've been made redundant. You got a bit of money. I got a nice payout. I was in a fairly high paying profession and role before I decided to move into teaching, and at least from the external, I would have looked quite successful. I wasn't happy. I was pretty horrid as far as what my life looked like. But I had done some coaching prior, and I really enjoyed working with those kids when I was coaching at university. So it was like this moment of clarity at that dinner table. What I really want to do. They were sort of probing me and really not letting me just shirk the answer. They wanted me to dial in on, what do you really want to do? And I just said, I think I want to teach. And it was that night I got home and I applied to do the teaching degree. And I think within 10 days I was accepted, and I started about a month and a half later.
Wow, so it was very quick.
It was, yeah. And just went for it, and I haven't looked back since.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a great point in our conversation to head to a break, and then we'll talk about just how you actually achieved that. We've had a look at what it means. Now, let's have a look at how you do it. Alex, how do you become head of year?
Okay. So I'll explain how I become a head of year within the context of my context and my experience. It's important to say that it might be different for different people, but ultimately you become a teacher first, a high school teacher. So that requires either a 4-year degree or like I did, it was a graduate diploma. So I ended up being 1.5 years, I think it was in total, of study. That includes a prac, so that's just a 10-week or a term's worth of time where you're in a classroom learning with a mentor, and then you get your teaching license and you start looking for jobs. I was really privileged, and I suppose it helps explain my drive and purpose. When I decided to become a teacher, I just wanted to go back and teach at the school that I was a student at. I thought that's the goal, that's the peak. And it was about giving back. I had a couple of years at this school where my family was actually going through some things. There was a bit of a family breakup. Parents ended up getting divorced, and the school was actually very accommodating in terms of school fees and treated my family with a great deal of dignity and respect, despite having, really, if they wanted to, the ability to go, well, off you go, you've got to find a different school. And that sort of really helped shape me, I think, and it also helped drive me. So I wanted to come back to the school and I wanted to give back. So if I could give back as an employee, that would have been brilliant. So I applied for a number of jobs when I finished my degree, and the school that I went to was one of them. I actually was quite lucky in that I got 3 job offers in one day from 3 different schools. So I must have been doing something right, Paul. Yeah. So 2 of them were a contract and one was an ongoing position. What an ongoing position means is that you're basically a teacher there for a rolling period of time. You're a permanent employee rather than a contract time. So, and that happened to be the school that I worked at, that I was a student at. So that was a no-brainer for me. I started teaching at the school, and 7 years later, it was time to move on. So usually as a head of year, you need some experience under your belt. They won't give you a head of year position straight from uni. I'd imagine that would be quite a unique opportunity and a very unique individual as well to get that kind of position. You have to have some life experience. I think a 23-year-old grad going into a head of year job might find it a little tricky. So I certainly feel like it helps having a bit of life experience. And then really it's a promotional position like anything. When they come up, you apply, and you have to go through that formal process of an interview, just like you would for any job position. If you know how to build good relationships, know your students well, know how they learn, and also know how to help them through issues and problems when they arise, then you've given yourself a pretty good grounding to consider being a head of year. It's also about driving culture. I think you have to be very good at having a clear vision of what's the collective journey that you want to steer this year group through. Or to use another analogy, like a shepherd in many ways. You got to just steer them in the right direction. And even those lost sheep or the black sheep sometimes as well, you've got to still bring them along for the ride. So that's sort of a little bit about the process of how you do it. You don't really need any further formal qualifications to be a head of year, though it's always well well received if you've committed to further learning. And as I mentioned earlier, my love of learning, I'm constantly trying to learn through reading. I am doing a master's at the moment as well, so I'm doing further study, and I'll probably finish that degree and then go straight on to the next one, much to the delight, no pun intended there, of my wife. So yeah, that's sort of a little bit about the process of how to go about becoming a head of year.
All right. So the short version is you get a university level qualification.
Yep.
Then you go and get a job, get experience. But you want the right sort of experience when you're out there as well.
Yeah.
And then that sets you up for the opportunity to go for a middle management position like head of year.
Yeah. And ultimately you're dealing with kids who come from all different walks of life, and you just have to know how to approach them. And you also increasingly are dealing with children who have a number of mental health or learning difficulty challenges, and it's just about how can you embrace them where they're at and just help them continue to learn and grow.
Sounds like an amazing place to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm very lucky, and there's nothing else I'd rather be doing from a professional perspective, that's for sure. Yeah, very, very fulfilled.
Thanks very much for being on Forest.chat, Alex. It's been wonderful hearing about your journey and the impact that you have as a head of year. It's quite amazing.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll keep doing this podcast. It's awesome. So I look forward to continuing to listen.
Thanks very much. I do sometimes ask people what's next. You've mentioned about you're already doing a bit more study.
Yeah. Look, I've got a few ideas about where I'm going to next. I would love the opportunity to see where I go in education and within the Catholic schooling context. I love learning about leadership, so that's certainly a direction I'm considering, seeing if I can move into other levels of leadership, or even if I could just help in a different context. I think that's what drives me. With students, it's great, and I love being a head of year. What does the next few years look like? Well, who knows? But as long as I'm learning, I think that's what's important. I think as well, getting to a stage now where I'm able to get into a bit more balance as well. Being a dad of young kids, the extracurricular stuff is only going to increase. So I want to make sure I'm there for it all too. If I can do that and continue to grow either through study or through other employment opportunities, then I'm definitely still see a big smile on my face.
You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and today we've been talking with Alex Smith about being a head of year. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest.chat. Share the domain Forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. When you sign up for the emails, you get advance notice of the episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you do something that other people may find interesting, book an interview at forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a local business, book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you with our next guest. Until next time, enjoy making it happen.